This episode has been sponsored by Connor Insurance and Auto Owners Insurance Company. Hi, this is Abby at Connor Insurance. There have been record amounts of rain all across the country this year. Most damage occurs when water backs up in your drains and basement fixtures. If you have a basement, you need to check the limit your policy provides for water backup. If you aren't sure how to check, just give me a call or visit us at connorins.com.
Shepherd has been serving the children of Indianapolis and helping families for 34 years. We work to break the cycle of poverty on the Near East Side of Indianapolis because we love the children in our neighborhood. We are privileged to watch our neighbors grow physically, emotionally, spiritually, and academically through the relationships we build every day. Partnered with Shepherd by donating $34 to celebrate 34 years. Visit shepherdcommunity.org/BLF to join us.
And now, the show that bridges the gap between faith and business. Welcome to Bottom Line Faith.
Well, hello, everyone. This is Ray Hilbert. I am your host here at Bottom Line Faith, and we would like to welcome you all back to another episode of the program where we get an opportunity to go north, south, east, and west, all across this great land, and we get to interview some of the most amazing followers of Christ to learn how they're living out their faith in the marketplace, ranging from entrepreneurs and startups to CEOs of major corporations and athletes and celebrities. And really what we're trying to do here is encourage you as a follower of Christ, because you're out in the marketplace every day trying to live out your faith, trying to integrate work and faith and life. And that's what we're hoping to do, is encourage you here at Bottom Line Faith. I'm your host, Ray Hilbert, of course, and we are excited today. We are in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic global crisis, and so we are recording this conversation via Zoom, just a little bit different technology than we normally use. I hope you all give us some grace on that, but I'm excited to welcome to the show Sue Warnke. Let me tell you just a little bit about Sue. You're going to love our conversation today. She is the Senior Director of Content and Communications Experience at Salesforce. That's just a part of what she does. We're going to learn about the other roles that God is calling her in leading faith initiatives at one of the largest companies on the planet. Sue, welcome to Bottom Line Faith.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, listen, I'm sitting in my home, literally in Indianapolis, Indiana, and you are sitting where as we're talking right now?
So I'm in a city called Pacifica, just south of San Francisco.
Yes. And so we were talking a little bit before we hit the record button, and you grew up somewhere other than San Francisco. Why don't you just kind of walk our listeners through a little bit of your personal journey, and what was it that in your bio it says here that you were a proud agnostic, and I want to hear more about your story, but just tell us a little bit about your upbringing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in a town called Layton, Utah, which was one of the most LDS cities in the world at the time, about 95% LDS or Latter-day Saints. And, you know, my parents had gone to church when I was very little, but they had a falling out and kind of walked away. And so I was pretty much agnostic most of my life and very much an outsider in this very religious environment. And that kind of built up a wall around me about faith. I was sort of, in some ways, an outsider, and in other ways, the target of evangelism. And so I really developed a very big wall against religion and sort of pursued the gods of success. And you know what? That works pretty well for a while. But I pursued education and got my master's, went to Colorado, got this amazing job at Salesforce, and in some ways was sort of sitting on my throne, looking out at this kingdom I had created. And about 5 years ago, I started to feel a void. And, you know, I wasn't sure what that was about, but I went off kind of attempting to pursue it, and that led to my faith journey.
Well, let's talk about that just for a moment. So it wasn't as if you grew up without some sort of faith background. In fact, as you've shared, there was quite a bit of it there, but maybe some of the experiences weren't so favorable or, you know, what you would have hoped to have been. But what was it that triggered this discontent? What was there an event, or was it just more of a gradual thing? What caused you to realize that something was missing?
Yeah, there wasn't anything dramatic. That's what was so sort of strange about it, is that I had merely accomplished so much. I had good friends. I had this incredible job. I have this wonderful husband. I have 3 teenagers, and I had everything, essentially comfort. And yet I was frustrated. I was frustrated with my job, which is actually an amazing job. And so I thought that I had to go fix that. I thought, well, then maybe it's my job. Maybe I need to go find a different job that's maybe more meaningful. So I actually did quit Salesforce 5 years ago. And I was confident that this would be the solution to this void that I was feeling. I went off and I tried leadership development, which sounds very fulfilling, right? Like, I'm going to go change these people's lives. And, it was great. And I was traveling around the world teaching leadership to Fortune 500 companies. But then suddenly I had to sell these classes. And it turns out I was terrible at sales. And so really, for the first time in my life, I kind of fell flat on my face in the job world and experienced real failure. I mean, to the dollar, right? I mean, I had a quota that I was just nowhere near. So it was just utter failure on the job. And then, one of my kids was having some health problems. So I sort of felt like I could not solve these things. I pursued solution, and in fact, I found failure. So that was just deeply humbling for me.
And so it was in 2017 that you made this transition in your life. You had this personal encounter with Christ. Was there a friend? Was there a family member? What was it that really caused you, or who was it that helped cause you to turn to Jesus to find this meaning and fulfillment that you had been pursuing, right, in job or career, what have you? Tell us about that. What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, Jesus was really the last thing on my mind. I mean, even in the pits of my despair and hopelessness, I never thought of Jesus, never thought of God, ever. I remember, though, that I was in a hotel room in Virginia one night, really at the bottom of it all. And I'm sure it was a prayer, but I didn't think of it as a prayer. And I just said, I give up. And I'd never said that before. And I really just meant, like, I really, truly can't fix this. I've really exhausted everything. And it was not until I said that things started to happen very weirdly. The first thing that happened is I got this medical chart for my son. And at the very bottom of this long PDF was from the doctor, mentioned God. And it was just a light mention saying, like, in the midst of all this medical advice, don't forget that spirituality is also a healing agent. And normally that would have really frustrated me to see that. And for some reason, it was very appealing. So appealing, I kept reading it over and over. And then other strange things happened. Suddenly I wanted to listen to Christian music, which I had never wanted to listen to before. I used to sort of mock it almost. And I would put on my headphones and very secretly listen to Christian music, and I couldn't stop listening to it. I was very drawn. And then I suddenly thought of my kid's old karate teacher from 6 years ago. And suddenly I remembered that he had invited me to church 6 years ago, which of course I laughed off at the time, but he came to my mind pure as day. I mean, his face exactly. And I pulled out my phone and I texted him sort of out of my own being. And I said, can I go to church with you? And he said, yes. And I went, and it was very beautiful. I was very confused, but it was beautiful. And I went, I was going on a business trip the next day. I went to Austin, Texas. And while I was unpacking my things, still very confused, this karate teacher texted me and said, Sue, I pray that the Holy Spirit will reveal himself to you today, which was a very big prayer. I didn't even understand it.
Yeah, what does that mean, right?
But it felt so beautiful. And I was drawn to that. And then it was just an hour later, out of the blue, my aunt called me and she said, nervously, Sue, this is going to sound weird, but I'm supposed to call you right now and tell you about God. And I just thought, you know what? I better listen to this. And it wasn't kind of what she was saying so much. I mean, she just sort of shared about Jesus in her life. But I very much felt in the presence of God. And I knew I had a decision. Either this is a crazy coincidence and I'm making it up, or this is true. There's really only those two options. And so I took a deep breath after just half an hour and I just said, Jean, I believe you. And we hung up and I fell to my knees in just tears and repentance for about 3 hours. And I was finally able to pray after that time, kind of looking back at my whole life, this life that I had taken credit for, and realizing that it was this gift and that I had just, dishonored God in taking credit. And then my first prayer came to me and it was just 2 words and it was, I'm sorry. And that just kicked off this entire life change. A few days later, I stumbled into my local church in Pacifica and I said, how do you give your life to Jesus? 5 people came right around me and I said a very messy prayer. And, God just blessed me, blessed my life. I very quickly got an offer to come back to Salesforce and I had my mission, I had my purpose, and like the rest just has taken off.
Well, that is such an encouraging and amazing story, and just how God just kind of showed up and showed off. But I'm curious, before we move on, Sue, what was that like communicating to your husband, to your kids? Like, kind of help us understand that part of the story, because it's a pretty big deal here.
Yeah, to go from we'd always told our kids, nobody really knows the truth, believe whatever you want, to go from that to I'm a born again Christian. Yeah. was pretty concerning actually for the family. Yeah. So we had some pretty tough discussions for a while. And, my husband's first reaction was, who are these people? What have they done to my wife?
Yeah, sure.
But it led to some really good conversations. And, they're all on their different journeys. My one daughter converted and was baptized, and we all go to church and check it out, and are at different stages. But we could pretty quickly see that this wasn't a scary thing. That actually I was a better mom, a better wife. That how it was working in my life was mostly about listening better, about helping the homeless, about kind of lifting others. So once they could witness what this meant, what it actually looks like, not what maybe the news portrays it as, they were won over by that. Yeah.
Oh, that's so awesome. So that's a fun story. It's an amazing story, and it's me, and I know to our listeners as well. So let's talk then a little bit about how God is using you in the marketplace. For those who may have heard the name Salesforce but may not be familiar with the company, give us just a snapshot.
Yeah, it's the world's #1 CRM, or customer relationship management tool. So we help customers connect with their customers. We help them give a single view of their customer, from sales to marketing to support.
All right, very good. And so you have well, tell us about your actual role as the Senior Director of Content and Communications Experience. Let's understand that a little bit, and then I'd like to talk about the role of the faith-based initiatives that you're involved with. But tell us about your vocational career role.
Sure, yeah. So what I get paid for. So in any kind of software company, it's really broken into 2 big categories. One is sales and marketing, getting the product out, and the other is building the product. So I'm on the building side in the technology area, and I lead technical writers who write developer guides and online help and videos, really all the instructions for how to use this tool, including, online applications.
All right, fantastic. And so you've got a couple of very unique and distinctive faith-based roles or entities or kind of networks or, associations inside of Salesforce. Where would you like to start with that? Tell us about that.
I never really know what I'm doing. I just know what God is asking me that day. And so, right after I got an offer to come back to Salesforce, I remember I was in the back of the church cleaning up chairs, and I feel like I had kind of the voice of God, or I felt like I sort of received my calling, which was sort of simply, I need you to be bold. I have trained you well. All of that training you thought was for you was actually for me. And I want you to be courageous. And so I felt that, once I started back at Salesforce, that I needed at first to kind of pull the Christians out of hiding and encourage them, even though that would be scary. So that was the first thing I did. Actually, the first day I got my laptop, I opened it up and I was dying of curiosity. Is there a Christian group already? And that was the first thing I found. And it was very dormant, just a dozen people. And I posted, would anybody like to pray with me? Which
just threw it out there. Anybody like to pray? Okay.
And I didn't, the thing that was so interesting is I didn't want to do it. I was scared to do it. I resisted it, but I knew that I was supposed to do it. So it was like a baby step that God was just simply very clearly asking me to do. And then nobody answered. Nobody responded for about 2 weeks. And it was pretty torturous because I thought, oh my gosh, what do people think of me? And I can't take it down now. And they must think I have no credibility, or, all these negative thoughts flooded me, but I kept it up. And then eventually a woman named Amanda replied, and she said, I would love to pray with you. And so the two of us found a conference room. Everybody could see in, but it didn't matter. We prayed. And in that moment, I knew that I could be myself. I could have this faith self, and I could be my work self, and they could come together. And it was just this glorious moment. I'll never forget it. And, that the next week there were 3 people, and then there were 5, and then 10, and then other cities started doing this, and, Mexico, Brazil, London, we now have prayer meetings almost every day of the week somewhere, and probably over 500 or 600 Christians who meet to talk and pray and share scripture. So that was totally unexpected, just sort of being obedient. And then this other organization started, which we can talk about too. But that was
and I want to get into that interfaith conversation and cross faith in just a moment. But did I catch you that you said there are several hundred now that are gathering? Do they do this online to pray? Do they do it like in small pockets in different offices around the world? What's that look like logistically?
Yeah, so there are several hundred that are part of, Christians at Salesforce, and most of them just consume the content that we post in chatter groups. We have this tool called Chatter, like Facebook. So we post devotionals every week from YouVersion, and people can respond there. People share pictures. And then about 3 to 4 days a week, somewhere in the world, we'll have an online prayer meeting. So they're all online. The one exception is Indiana meets in person because there's enough of a gathering there that they can just meet in person, but everything is online accessible. And so, I usually join there's one that is run out of Texas on Wednesday mornings at 7:15 my time. I join that one, and then I join our Friday one at noon. And it's just quick, it's like a small fellowship, read the Bible, talk about how it applies, and pray.
Yeah. And so, and we're going to get into the cross interfaith initiative in a moment, but have you had any pushback? Have you had any criticism or anybody who has come up against this, Christians at Salesforce movement internally? Has any of that happened? And if so, what was that like?
Yeah, I would say no to that. I think we feared that. I think and it was so dormant for so long. People were worried about that, and we sort of assumed that it wouldn't be allowed, and assumed that people would think terrible things of Christians. And the way we went about it is we wrote up a vision statement, and we call it a V2 MOM. That's our planning documents, but it's a vision, values, and just like any kind of planning doc, we wrote it up like who we are and who we aren't, as if to say, don't worry, we're not here as a proselytizing engine. We are not here to go push our faith on other people. We're really here to pray and to do service projects and learn the Bible and talk about the Bible together. And so we kind of wrote that up. We shared that with the leaders at Salesforce, the HR and diversity leaders.
Yeah.
One, is this okay? Does this align with your vision and values? And, just want to keep you in the loop.
Yeah.
And also we shared our stories. I met with one of the top diversity leaders, and I just said, I want you to know that people are meeting for prayer and they're worried about it. And that stunned him. He didn't like to know that people were afraid or worried. That's not the culture he wanted. So, he highly encouraged us to not feel that way and to be open about it. And so we used to call our meetups, I think, just meetup, because it shows up on your calendar, and very quickly we're like, okay, well, let's take a baby step of faith and call it Christians at Salesforce Meetup. And nothing bad happened. And in fact, that way. And, it's just so funny to me how we build up this wall that actually, I think it's there. I do think it's there, but I think it's paper thin. And I think you can kind of blow it away with a sincere question, with honesty, authenticity, just saying, hey, this is my thought. What do you think? Is this okay? Yeah. And opening up that dialogue. So it's totally fine. And now we have Muslims at Salesforce and Sikhs at Salesforce, and we have a Jewish group, and it's all fine. It's all great. It's nothing that we needed to even worry about.
Yeah. And we're going to get to that. I just got one more question. I want to go back to that moment. You talked about, you threw out that first piece of communication, inviting others to join you, and it just kind of hung there for a couple of weeks. Anyone really respond? I think you said your first friend was Amanda. I think you mentioned the name, right? So what I'd like to do, Sue, is let's say that there's somebody listening to this conversation right now, and they have felt a tug on their heart. They have felt God prompting them to do something about living out or sharing their faith in the marketplace. But for whatever reason, they've just not done that. They've just not taken that step. So as someone who took that very first, very frightening step, right? And now a global movement inside your company, what advice or encouragement would you have for somebody who's listening to this and saying, what should I do about this? What word of encouragement would you give for them?
Yeah, I think it really is about figuring out what God wants of you. So some of us are A-types and we like to achieve and accomplish things, right? So we think, oh, well, then I have to go start a Christian group at my company or a faith group at my company. And maybe yes, maybe not. Figure out what God is asking of you. Your companies are at vastly different places, in terms of their readiness to talk about faith for really legitimate reasons. Like, we have to be empathetic to what our leaders deal with. It's not easy to talk about faith, and it's not because they hate us. It's really legitimate why this is risky. So figure out where your company's at with that. Figure out mostly what God is asking of you. He may not be asking you to go post, can you pray for me? He may be asking you to go into a meeting with the goal of loving the other person and making them feel Jesus's love, rather than getting your proposal accepted.
Yeah.
He may be asking you to form a volunteer event that it partners with a Christian organization, or, there's like 10 or 15 different first steps. He could just be asking you to actually wear your cross for the first time at work, or to start talking about your faith in a way that at least outs you. So I would say the very first thing is to certainly listen to God, really try to understand. He rarely expects us to leap mountains. It's usually a baby step, because he knows what we're kind of ready for. Yeah. And then just do it.
I love
whatever it is, just do it. He will bless it. He will bless it times 10.
Yeah. And I can't imagine in your wildest dreams you ever thought that one first initial email would become what it's become. Is that fair to say?
Oh, completely. I knew that there must have been Christians like hiding and feeling scared. So I thought, well, we could at least get into a room and pray together, at least like 5 of us. That would be so great. I thought,
Yeah.
Now it's just hundreds.
Well, and we'll move on. But I was just thinking, we're sure, just past the Easter season as we're recording this, and I was reflecting on this even as I was listening. Is that that first Easter morning, the disciples they're hunkered down, much like we are in this global pandemic. They're saying, you got to stay safe and stay away from. That's the way the first disciples were, right up on Jesus's crucifixion. They were in fear that their lives were going to be taken as a follower of Christ, and so. And slowly, they start going out and boom, then this global explosion of Christianity has obviously been the result of that. So it's Zechariah 4, folks. It says, do not despise the day of humble beginnings. And that's what Sue is walking us through is those early days. And so now there's hundreds and hundreds of Christ followers meeting weekly and regularly online and face-to-face throughout Salesforce, celebrating and encouraging one another in their Christian faith. Now, you've got another very substantial movement that God has uniquely positioned you in that's not just Christ-centered, but it's more of an interfaith or cross-faith. Tell us a little bit about that and your role there.
Yeah, so, right about the same time I was, talking to the other Christians at Salesforce, I was thinking we have to really go to the top here. We shouldn't be just forming these secret groups at the bottom. That is important. But I started to search and say, we talk a lot about equality here and diversity and bring your full authentic self. Well, for me and for many others, faith is by far the most important part of our identity. When you ask, how would you describe yourself? For me, I would say Christian far sooner than I would say a woman or anything about my background. For me, it is absolutely faith. And 90%, hugely, like not just kind of, it's not a hobby, And
Right.
so, what about those people? Maybe there's only 5% of us or 10% of us, but what about them? Can they bring their full authentic selves, or do they have to check that out the door and feel afraid and ashamed and worried? And when someone asks them, what did you do over the weekend, have to think about, what do I say? That's the lowers productivity and morale, and people actually leave. And so I started to research and found out that there were these couple trailblazers that had already started this conversation at the top with our official Office of Equality and our employee resource group organization. And so they had already kicked it off and gotten approval actually for a group that's now called Faith Force. And that is an employee resource group, and it is multi-faith. I always have to, when I talk to Christians, I very quickly have to say, but don't worry, because I think when Christians hear that, they think that it's a belief system. It's because some people use that to describe like an interfaith belief system, which essentially says all faiths are basically the same and, so many commonalities, which is not at all what this is. When we say interfaith or cross-faith, it's really organizational. It's really just, hey, when we do philanthropy and education, let's learn about each other's different backgrounds too. So what it does is it magnifies what you can do when you kind of come together and do it together. We in fact, just this morning, we had our global Easter info session through Faith Force, not through Christians at Salesforce. If Christians at Salesforce put on an Easter event, it would very much ring that this is for Christians, right? But if Faith Force puts on an Easter event, it really is truly for everybody. And it was fascinating. We had people of all different faiths from all over the world asking questions like, well, what do you think about Jesus? And what does this mean? And why do you take communion? And what is Holy Week? Asking good questions that just wouldn't happen if this were for a Christian event only. So it puts people in proximity and just blasts open the door of conversation. That has become the fastest growing employee resource group in Salesforce history. It has over 3,500 members. It has tremendous publicity, is reported on in big newspapers all over the world.
What's really so fun and so awesome about that, Sue, is that for someone who is an authentic follower of Christ and mature in their faith, they're the least threatened of anyone to have those cross-cultural and cross-faith conversations because we know the answer that the Bible has for every question. And not that we fully understand what God's ways up to, but we know that the Bible does have those answers that you're talking about. What happens after we die, and where is the dividing line of who's considered a follower or not, and why do bad things happen, and all those things, and we shouldn't be intimidated by that. So I actually love and encouraged that that's going on. So what kinds of activities, what kinds of functions, what kinds of things does that Faith Force group do together?
Yeah, so we really have three pillars. One is celebrations. So we celebrate all of the major holidays, and we do it together, like for Sukkot, the Jewish holiday of Sukkot, we got together, all faiths got together, and we built an outdoor sukkah in Salesforce Park, the first ever official sukkah in a public space in San Francisco, and it was huge, and thousands of people came from all over San Francisco to see this thing and ask questions like, what is a sukkah? And I could, I had to learn too, but I could well, it's this structure, and it's intentionally incomplete, these openings in the roof. That's because we have to rely on God. It's not all about us. And, and I talked about, being in the desert, the Israelites in the desert.
Yeah.
It was so beautiful. And that never would have happened if it was just like the Jewish group at Jews at Salesforce putting that on. So we do these huge celebrations. We get together with our Muslim friends, and we help them put on Eid, which is the big festival after a month of fasting during Ramadan, which is coming up. That's one. Another pillar is philanthropy, and that is, these huge volunteer events in San Francisco. I bring hundreds of people to the inner city of San Francisco and the poorest district, and we serve the homeless. And for me, we partner with a Christian group, and we also partner with a Jewish group. For me, it's really where people can see, from my perspective, what Jesus really looks like and who he really was, and he cared about the forgotten.
I love it. And God's really allowed you the opportunity to speak about faith in Silicon Valley to many organizations, right? Maybe just give us a snapshot of some of the opportunities that you've had to share your faith and living out your faith in the tech world.
Yeah, it's so cool that God is letting me do this, because he trained me in training,
Yeah, right.
was training and public speaking, and I thought it was for me, and it wasn't. Actually, it was all for him. So praise God for that. It all started I was allowed to share my testimony in a really small group, like around a campfire. And that was just shocking to me. And I thought, wow, people care about my story. And I think the fact that I'm a late in life convert, and the fact that I'm in, the fairly unreligious area of San Francisco makes it an appealing story. So I share at churches. I'll share with Christian organizations like Cru and InterVarsity at their conferences. And then my favorite really, though, is sharing at multi-faith events,
Yes.
Really where I think there's a lot of Christian conferences out there. I don't think I'm moving the needle quite as much when I speak to that population as I do when I really talk to HR and diversity and inclusion leaders to say, this isn't so scary. Consider allowing faith into your organizations, and the business benefit to you is outrageous. And if I can help launch a faith group at a company, that to me is monumentally influential, even more than encouraging Christians, which is also a very important calling. But I think there's a lot of people doing that.
Yeah. And so as I'm thinking about this, Sue, one of the things that I love about what God is apparent, as far as I can tell, doing, and as far as this integration of faith and business is even technology, like what you and I are doing right now, having this conversation via Zoom. You are looking into my home. This is where I live, right? And so just the physical environment, there's an integration of you into my world because you're looking in my personal study. And so even technology and the changes and the way we're doing work these days is setting the table, right, for more of an integration of the real person, the authentic person, as you said earlier. And I love that. And what a perfect stage that God is setting for us, because it's not the old days of just leave work at work and leave home at home. It is all encompassing, and you're seeing God use that, right? That's what you're seeing.
Yeah, I agree. I think that was my takeaway during all of this sheltering in place. Is this is sort of what we've been saying for the past 2 to 3 years with Faith Course is there's a big benefit when you can just be yourself and you can bring your whole self to work, and you don't have to keep part of it at the door. It's actually really wonderful when I see somebody's small child run into the frame and I realize they're just like me, and it's hard, it's not so easy all the time, and we're not perfect, and it's really pretty cool in the same way that I can actually stand up and tell a story about my faith in a company meeting, and very quickly people are completely fine with it. As long as I'm not pushy and boring and cringy and all these things that we would be anyway, hopefully. In business.
Absolutely. And I'm really thrilled because I've been praying this entire time, my 2 dogs, that they wouldn't be barking while we're recording this. So far, that prayer. So we have just gosh, our time has gone by so fast. We have just a couple of moments left here. But what I'd like to do is I got a couple of questions that I love to ask at the end of each one of my conversations. And I'd like you to maybe go back to if you had a chance to sit across the table from the 21-year-old version of you, and if you could get her to listen to you, what advice would you give 21-year-old Sue?
Well, this is such a terrible answer, and I'm sure you hear it all the time, that I wouldn't change anything. But, as I think about it, God has a plan. He's got this all worked out. It really had to happen just as it did for this to be what it is today. And I look at my life and I feel such grace with it and such forgiveness. And what has struck me is it's the story of God in my life that is resonating with people. It's not my accomplishments or my seminary degree, that I don't have, but my imaginary one. It is really the details of that struggle, and so I wouldn't change a thing. Yeah.
Well, I can tell you, I can, from my vantage point, I can see exactly, to your point, how God has set you up perfectly. You're just winsome. You're very encouraging. You're very uplifting. And I just bet that people want to talk to you on a regular basis about your faith. You're not perfect. I get that. None of us are. But it like you said, it's not a hobby. It's genuinely you, and you're allowing people to see inside. I've gathered that just in our conversation today. So that's really cool. That is really cool. So last question, and for our regular listeners, they know I ask this at every conversation. It's always my last question. I call my 423 question, and it's based out of Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, where Solomon writes that above all else, guard your heart, for from it flows all of life. So as we wind down our conversation today, I'd like you to kind of fill in the blank for us. What's that one piece of advice you'd like to leave our audience with? Above all else.
Yeah. It's tough because these 2 words go together. It's really a 2-step process. So I would say above all else, listen and obey. So I have my life verse up on my wall next to me, and it's from Isaiah 30:21. Whether you look to the left or to the right, you will hear a voice behind you saying, "This is the way, walk in it." We have to listen. He'll tell us exactly where to go. He'll tell us when to turn. He'll tell us when to stop, right? It has nothing to do with what we want to do and what we think we're equipped to do and what our ambitions are. It's just completely when to turn and how, and then to actually do it, right? He says, walk in it. Like, this way, just walk, just step. I'm not telling you to win the marathon. I'm telling you to just pivot and step. come on, So I feel like that would be above all else, just remove the burden of accomplishment and pray, wake up and pray and look at your calendar with God and say, okay, what am I supposed to do today for you? I work for you. What do I do? Wait, he'll tell you something to do and just do it.
I love that. I'm writing that down. Remove the burden of accomplishment.
Amen. God's
teaching us that. That now as we're all sheltered in. It's like everything's been stripped away, and he's saying, focus your eyes on me. Well, I thank you so much for being our guest here at Bottom Line Faith today. And I know this in my spirit. God is going to use this conversation today to encourage thousands of our listeners all around the country. And so I thank you. This has been so cool, and I appreciate your time today.
Oh, thank you. Praise God. Have a good one.
Well, folks, what an amazing and encouraging and uplifting conversation that we've just had with Sue Warnke. Sue is the Senior Director of Content and Communications Experience at Salesforce, one of the largest companies, certainly in America, but also on the planet, with tens of thousands of employees. Wasn't that great to just learn her journey, how just a few years ago she came to Christ, she was an agnostic, and God brought her to himself, and how now he's positioned her with one act of obedience, sending out an email that now there are hundreds and thousands of employees in that company who are expressing their Christian faith because Sue was obedient to what God called her to do. Hey, listen, if you'd like to learn more about Sue and follow her, she's got a great blog that she writes regularly online. You can learn more about that at Leanership. That's Leaner, LEANERSHIP.org. Leanership.org. You can follow Sue. She's one of the leading followers of Christ, influencing the Silicon Valley and the tech world. And we hope that you've been encouraged by our conversation. That's what we're about here at Bottom Line Faith, is to encourage you to live out your faith every day in the marketplace. Hey, we're still sheltered in here during COVID-19, but we pray that you'll continue to check out the program, pass along. We all need encouragement in this tough time. So pass along the interviews that we do here at Bottom Line Faith to your friends and your family, and encourage them. We're in a new day of living out our faith in the marketplace. So until next time, I am your host, Ray Hilbert, encouraging you to live out your faith every day at work. God bless.
Bottom Line Faith is brought to you by Truth at Work. If you'd like to hear about new episodes or listen to past episodes, visit us online at bottomlinefaith.org. You can also subscribe to the show through Google Play and iTunes.